Okay, great.
Good to go.
Awesome. Okay, welcome everybody to our second ASF webinar. It is your app Measure Up, evaluating communication supports. Let's see. Use my tool here. Okay. Even though we're going to be talking about apps and paper-based supports today, I thought this was a nice quote to start with. We want to become more knowledgeable as to what options exist and make informed purchasing decisions that best support communication. And even though that was written regarding communication apps, I think that applies no matter what type of support that you're talking about. So for those of you that attended last week's webinar on the more comprehensive picture of an AAC system, we used this little 5 steps format, and we talked about appropriate goals. We talked about instruction and good teaching practices. We looked at the features of tools for communication. We talked about evaluation, and then we talked about team resources. And today we're going to look more specifically at the tool features. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do this webinar so early in this series is that we want to make sure that folks have access to appropriate materials for implementing the interventions that are going to be covered in the upcoming webinars. If the communication app or book that your child or student is currently using does not support robust communication and language development, then that is going to be a barrier for you to be able to move forward with some of those ideas. So before we get into that kind of instructional piece, we want to be sure that people have those proper tools in place. So today is the first big step for that. Okay, so our outcomes for today. Our outcomes include identifying the critical features of an expressive communication support. So that's a support that we intend for the child or the student to use to express themselves. We want to address concerns or challenges related to those features. So when we talk about some of the critical features, you may have questions about, oh dear, I'm not sure how that would look, or this might be a barrier. So I have some sort of Q&A format to help address those. I'd really like for folks to be, at the end of this webinar, to know whether your current tools are appropriate or not. So if you have the tool that your student or child is using, or you know what it looks like, do a little self-evaluation as we go and determine, is this tool going to measure up, or do we need to look at some other options, which is our fourth outcome, is to sort of connect you to some other ideas if the app or book or display that you're using isn't sufficient to support robust communication. A couple of other important notes about the webinar today. First, as I mentioned, this content applies to both light tech, which is sort of paper-based books, and high-tech systems. The reason I chose to focus on the app portion so much is because there has been such a proliferation of communication apps that are available, and so many more of my students are using them, that what I have found is because they're so readily available, many of the students are not going through a formal evaluation process to obtain the apps that they have. So they're being matched with an app based on what's available in the district or what the speech pathologist is familiar with. So then I'm regularly having to look at the tools that have been selected and see if they're sufficiently able to support this child's communication. So what we're doing today, I do on a regular basis. And I hope that what I can do is sort of hand to you the process that I use so that you can then evaluate the appropriateness of an existing tool, so what you already have. We're not going to cover every feature of a communication support. What we're doing is looking at what are the minimum basics. If I have this, am I good to go? And the answer is yes. If you have what we're talking about, you're good to go. It may not be the very best match for your child, but that's okay. It's enough of a match that we can move forward. The last piece of information regarding the webinar is the content here is not a replacement for a proper augmentative communication evaluation. So what we're trying to do is get people up and off the ground and started with something. But if your child has not had a proper AAC evaluation, definitely in tandem with moving forward with the materials and the ideas that we're presenting in the webinars. Please do continue to pursue that, because that's where you're going to get your very best match between your child and their communication support. Okay, so I just had a couple of little quotes that I threw in here that I thought just kind of reminded us of some of the good practices. An iPad with an appropriate app with well-designed vocabulary and appropriate support can be amazing, but we need to ensure that all our usual selection processes are used for each and every individual to ensure the best outcomes for them, whether this includes an iPad or not. So again, this speaks to the need for that AAC assessment and making sure that we look at all the variables that are involved to get the best match possible. Okay, this is a little schematic, I guess, or a little diagram that I thought would be really important to start with, because I want everyone to kind of be on the same page and really clearly understand the different parts of a communication support or a tool. So in this graphic, it might be a little hard to tell, but the outer edge here is a black iPad case, and the label at the top says packaging. And so the first component of an AAC system is that packaging or hardware, and that is your book or your board or your device. It's sort of the container for everything else, right? So nothing very specific about it, but you might have a communication device that's like a dedicated device for AAC, or the iPad or an Android, or again a communication board or a book. That's sort of the shell, right? There are not so many of those out there, but then when you get into the next level, which is the program, that is a little bit more varied, right? So the program is going to be the app or the software that you have selected. So if you know the name like Touch Chat or Proloquo to Go or Pod, those are all names of programs. Within the programs, you see page set, and that is the particular collection of displays that you select within the program. So I think it's important to understand the distinction of these pieces, because if there is a mismatch between what you're using and what we're talking about today, we want to find out where the mismatch is happening. And so the first thing we'll look at is, if the display that you're using doesn't, quote, measure up, could we choose a different page set within your program? And would that work? And if we can't do that, then we would go up to the level of the program and say, could we keep the packaging the same but just choose a different program? So oftentimes the program is a good match, but the page set selected is not robust enough, or it's been adapted to the point where it's no longer working. So we want to kind of intervene at the least possible level. So I think if you kind of understand how this works, it's going to be really helpful. You do see those pink boxes within the page set where I identified a couple of the different variables that go into a page set. So how many words are in there, what type of vocabulary is being used, what the format is of the vocabulary, the symbols that are used, how it's organized, how many how many symbols are on a page and how they're laid out. Those are all variables that differentiate one page set from another. The top three that you see highlighted in yellow, those are the three that we're going to talk about today, and those are the sort of three deal breakers that we want to kind of look at for our communication system. I included this dense quote because I thought it was important to think about this one point before we move on. Language is one of those things that we all use so intuitively that we imagine is very easy. But the reality is that language is very complex, and when you look at it piece by piece, we do have to take some time to learn it, and translating that into technology or mechanical forms is actually a lot more complex than one might think. So if we look back at that page set and all of those pink variables that we talked about, when we start to move those around and change those, we can get a very disorganized, disjointed system, because we don't recognize the complexity of language and how language works as a unit. So I think it's important that that we really look and make sure all of those parts are cohesive and not underestimate the complexity of language, and that having a very simplified system probably doesn't capture those complexities in the way that we need to. Okay, so if you attended the last webinar where we had the recommended practices, I just wanted to pull up the 3 practices that were included in the tools section. So these 1, 2, and 3 relate to the parts of speech, the vocabulary, and the vocabulary formats. And so I wanted to just show the connection that last time we talked about these are 3 important features of a communication tool, and so today we're going to look at those a little bit more closely. What I'll do, which I did last time, was to translate that into one simple sentence. So if you want to know if your app or program measures up, it should fit this statement. A complex language communication support must include a sufficient quantity of individual words and letters representing a range of language functions. It's basically as simple as that. So if you have an app that has these 3 features, it's highly likely that that app is going to be able to support complex communication. In contrast, if the app is missing even one of these features, it is not likely that you're going to be able to support true communication or language development. So what we can do is go forward and define each of these in more detail, and then you'll see some examples of boards that work. You'll see some non-examples, which are ones that don't work, and then we can address some of those concerns and challenges. So starting with sufficient quantity. What is sufficient quantity? What do we mean by that? I'm going to stick to 100 words as our working rule of thumb. And Erin and Caroline, we've all agreed that that's an okay working definition of sufficient. And the reason we're looking at a 100-word minimum for our communication system to start is we need lots of different types of words, right? We're going to talk about that in a minute. We need enough words that we can use for modeling, for talking to our child as life moves, we move through life and activities. We need to have enough words to kind of point to. And also, we need for those words to be specific enough and accurate enough. If you have a small set of words and you try and use those to model, oftentimes you can't find a word that even is close because you just don't have enough words. So when we look at some of the examples of boards that work, you'll see that if you have 100 words and you have 10 different types of words, you still only have 10 words on each section. That's not a whole lot, but it is sufficient. And we'll talk about what that 100 looks like and what it is and is not in terms of how it has to look when we talk about some of the concerns. Okay, individual words and letters is pretty straightforward. The system itself really should be based on individual words, not on phrases. You can include phrases and sentences, but those should be sort of situation specific or certain types of messages and not be the primary organization of the system. And then letters are important. They're necessary for literacy activities, which all of our children should be engaged in. And they're also beneficial for being able to spell out words or use first letters, etc. So there's no reason why letters are not included in every system. Okay, and then lastly, we have the range of language functions. And I typically talk about language functions in terms of parts of speech because I think it's a little more accessible. Language functions can be, I think, a little bit kind of clinical in terminology. So the functions are the purposes of language, and there can be, if you look at a very detailed list, there can be many, many purposes of language. You might be familiar with requesting or directing or commenting or questioning. There are lots and lots of them out there. I think if you look at your displays and you look instead for different parts of speech, that would help you to address the range of language functions in a roundabout way. So do you have nouns? And we'll talk about the role of nouns, but nouns are fine to include as part of the system, just not predominantly nouns. So people, places, and things. Are there action words in your system? Are there description words in your system? So location words, time words, describing things and actions, your adjectives or adverbs. Are there question words? Are there interjections like exclamations or social expressions? And then small words like determiners and word endings, and those might be added on after the first 100, but this would give you an idea if you looked across your system about whether it was going to meet the criteria for a range of language functions. And I'll show you an example here. Gail Van Tatenhoff talks about talking in a rainbow. I believe she was the one that said that. And what she meant was having visible vocabulary that shows a lot of colors, because we color code the different parts of speech. So if you see a lot of colors, then it's a good indicator that you have a lot of different parts of speech available. So this is a particular app called Sonoflex Lite. And the reason I like it is it's created by a company that uses the same software for a dedicated communication device, so it has good research supporting it. But this particular version is free, and with only a few minor restrictions. So what you see here is, do we have a sufficient quantity of vocabulary? Well, we don't have 100 on this page, but we can, based on looking at some of the colored buttons here that link to other pages, we can expect that we have overall many more than 100 words in this system. Do we have a range of parts of speech? I see from the colors, I see pronouns, I see action words, I see some of my small words, I see orange for my objects. So yes, we have the range, and then we also have our letters and our single words, and I also know that up here in quick phrases, we have our phrases. So we've got a little bit of everything that we would want there. Here's another example of a single page from the Go Talk Now page set. So this is the first page. You see the next button down here. If you clicked on that, you would see another page with more folders on it with particular links similar to the Sonoflex Lite with those individual folders. But this is the main page, and again, look for that rainbow. We see pinks and greens and yellows and purples and red borders. So those are all different parts of speech. So we have that. You don't see the letters, but they would be in the folders on the next page, as would some of the quick talk kind of phrases. So this particular page set only has 25 on this page, but if you combine the 25 here with what's available in other folders on other pages, then you do get your quantity. So this would support robust communication. Here's a page from the Proloquo2Go app, and this is the intermediate core page set. That's what it's called. So if you remember, we went, let's see if I can navigate to, this is it. Oh my goodness, it is. The page set is within the program. So we have an iPad as the packaging, the program is Proloquo2Go, and the page set is the intermediate 45. So that's how that looks. Let's see. Touch chat, okay. So we have the rainbow, different color-coded parts of speech, and we have folders here that link to other pages with more vocabulary. So we have our range of functions, we have our sufficient vocabulary, and because I know this page set, I know that they also have access to keyboard. So we have all of our requirements present. Here's an example of what I hope you would recognize as a display that does not meet the criteria. So hopefully we're seeing less and less of this, but this is an example of a display that was probably created based on a student's perceived motor abilities. And what we know is that we don't create a communication system that is limited in language due to motor or vision impairments. What we do is we accommodate those, but we first determine what does a robust communication system look like, and we create that, and then we create an access method that is works around those motor and vision limitations. And that does go beyond the scope of this particular training, but we certainly will have other webinars that address how do I kind of work around that issue. But this certainly is not a system that's organized like this or that looks like this would not support robust communication. Similarly, here we have an example of where in particular, you see the I want. So over here, this is a phrase-based system where in order to get to the objects that I want, I have to start the sentence with I want. Well, then how do I comment about that object, or how do I, make a statement about that object or tell you about that object? This type of setup precludes that. It does not let me use those other language functions. It forces me to be a requester. And then, as we know, we end up with individuals who are great at requesting and not other functions. Well, we create that by giving them a system that is focused on requesting. And that then, of course, creates a person that does lots of requesting. So let's do the opposite, right? Okay, so here is a picture exchange communication system. And I'm not going to say that that system in and of itself doesn't measure up. I would have to look at the particular system, but I would like you to just look at what is here, and what you see pretty much predominantly or almost exclusively is objects. So requesting things that they want or don't want, and computer or chips or toys or things like that. And there are a couple of other things like maybe a stop or a no, but proportionally, I would look for at least 80% non-nouns in the core system, and I certainly don't see that here. So I would not want to try and support a child's language development using a system that looks like this. This is another one where it's promoting phrase-based communication only. Let's go is the first part of the phrase, and then you would hit home or school or playground. I can't ask a question about school. I can't make a comment about home. I have to just say, let's go, and then that place. So this is not an app that I would want for one of my students to be using for communication. And again, this is an example of similar to the one we saw where it just does not support robust communication. Similar to the PECs, here we see all nouns on the bottom, and then we see a couple of phrases at the top. I don't see the robust vocabulary. I don't see the range of functions. I don't see words that I can combine to make novel sentences, and I don't see the quantity that I would want. So certainly would not want to use that for communication. And again, this is another example. You see I want, and then whatever happens after that, I have to say I want about it. So I can't say anything else. So I would prefer to have this as a want symbol separate from the I want, so I could mix and match. The question words be separated out. So this particular app has some good pages to it. I just wouldn't necessarily want this one to be the page that we started with. It's not a noun-based with phrase support. Okay, so let's look at some of the kind of yeah buts, as I call them. This we sort of looked at a little bit, or talked about. My child is not going to be able to see or touch the targets with so many words on a page. You don't need 100 on the same page, okay? We're talking about having 100 symbols available in the entire system to start. So you may have 20 on the first page, and then you may have 10 other pages with the rest of the vocabulary on it. But the system should have at least 100 words available. So think about if you had a keyboard and you said to me, well, I'm just going to type my name, so I'm going to put the 5 letters that I need for my name up here in the corner, and I'm not going to worry about the rest of the letters because I don't need them. Well, I'd rather have you put the whole keyboard in place and then color code the letters for your name so you can find them in that field. but at least embed them with the other letters that you're going to need eventually, and focus on those particular letters that you need right now. Okay, so this is this is really what we're thinking about for our kids. Is we really want to make sure their system is set up um, so that it can accommodate growth, so that it is not kind of from the bottom up. We need to visualize the entire system and then put into place that first 100 and then start to build from there. We really want to think about allowing the adult to model. So if I have a system that has those two symbols on it, like the my turn, your turn, because I think that's what the child can hit, how in the world can I talk about what's going on? There's no way I can do any modeling, and therefore there's no way I can give access to this child um, for learning language. So the first thing I usually do, and it sometimes surprises people, is I say, I want a system that supports you modeling, and then once we get going and we see what that child does in response, then we can tweak that layout to support their access. But if you're not modeling, then we don't kind of get the system up and running, and we're not going to be able to see what they can do with it. And I will say it's not unusual that we're surprised by what our children can do when we model for them and they're motivated and we use consistent location and color cues. So there are many, many children that I see who I'm told up front that layout is not going to work. It's too much. It's for various reasons. And I say, please trust me and just try it. And if it doesn't work, when I come back, at least you've been comfortable with the modeling and you can see what's there and it's not on too many pages, and then we'll change it. And I can only recall one instance where we've had to make adjustments because there clearly was a visual issue. In all the other instances, the layout that we chose was accessible because the child was able to use other cues to compensate for the vision, or we've got a key guard, one of those peripheral things that helped with the access, etc. So don't be kind of deterred by the vision or the hearing, that kind of thing. Okay, so 100 words, that sounds like a lot. I'm not going to be able to remember where they are. There's too many there to model. Again, think about the keyboard. Um, you want all of those available, but you don't have to use all of them right away. There are strategies that we can use to help you to know where the words are that you're trying to focus on and how to find them. You can have cheat sheets, we can highlight, we can color code, all these different things. And typically what happens is once folks get started using a system, they want more vocabulary. They say, I want to say more. And less is sometimes much more difficult to work with because you go to find a word and you can't even find a word that's similar, so you now have to go to find a less specific word and it takes longer. So try and differentiate between I'm overwhelmed and the child is overwhelmed. And we can deal with the I'm overwhelmed. But usually the litmus test that I use is I ask, can I come in and model for you and the child? And if the team says yes, then I say, okay, then it's not that you're concerned that the child is overwhelmed, because if you were, you would say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. If you're going to let me come in and model for the child, then it's likely that you're the one that's overwhelmed by the way this looks, and that's because we're not used to seeing language.
Another question or concern that people have is, shouldn't we start with 2 or 4 or 8 targets and then work our way up? While this thinking is well-intentioned, it really has kept many of our children from developing language and communication skills, because no one ever seems to earn their way from 2 to 4 to 8, etc., up to a robust set of vocabulary. Many of the students who are given these smaller sets really fail, quote, to use the system, and it's usually due to the fact that it has insufficient vocabulary and there's limited opportunity for them to use that vocabulary or for them to see others using aided language input. And often it's not representative of their important messages. So think of being out in front of your child and being where you want them to be, as opposed to where, sort of having them demonstrate what they already know. So some folks may feel like phrases are a better representation than individual words. So why do we need single words when we can express something in a phrase, and wouldn't that be a time saver, etc. So yes, there are vehicles for using the pre-programmed phrases, appropriate places for sentences, but in our day-to-day communications, we really want to have a set of words that we can combine in endless ways for true novel communication for a range of purposes. So phrases are going to be more useful for specific applications, such as we mentioned in academic settings or in places where there are some timing elements. So try and have the individual words be the core of the user's primary system, and that's going to encourage more flexible language and modeling for a range of purposes. Again, this sort of repeats some of the content from before, but just to clarify, yes, phrases are fine to include as part of a balanced communication system, but really look at how and when you use them, and certainly don't use them in lieu of words. What if my child doesn't know his letters? He can't read. Why would we include letters? Well, if we want to have him know letters and be able to read, then it would be important to start exposing your child to letters and literacy activities, using those letters, etc. And we can also use letters for missing words, so we can spell out letters, or we can do a first letter cue. So there's lots of applications for letters, and they're their most powerful set of 26 symbols that we could possibly learn. So no matter what we perceive the child is currently able to do, we always want to include letters in all communication systems. So what if I have a child who's really interested in requesting? Should I have a system that really is heavy into the nouns? I like to say that you can't get out what you don't put in. So if we don't have a strong model for a variety of language functions, then it's not likely that the child is going to use them. So typically when we see a child that is a strong, quote, requester, it means that we've really reinforced that particular function. So we've given them symbols of objects, or objects, actual items, and kind of encourage that particular function. So if we want to see different functions, then we would need to provide access to different parts of speech, so that we do see different functions being able to be modeled and used expressively. So what's the role of nouns in the communication system? Well, nouns are an important part of a system. It's just that we don't have any particular nouns that are used so often that they would be included in the set of most commonly used words. So we have lots of different nouns that are used, but not any one particular noun that we would say, or a few nouns that we would say these are used so often that we have to include them. So noun vocabulary is sort of the add-on to the core vocabulary, so we call it kind of the fringe. So the core words are the real kind of strong meat and bones kind of part of the vocabulary, and then the fringe would be more specific, detailed vocabulary words, and nouns are often included in that. So yes, definitely include nouns, just don't go overboard with doing predominantly nouns in your system. So this is a continuation of that question about how do we use the different parts of speech, and doesn't it seem easier to just use nouns as opposed to all of those different colors? And one of the interesting dynamics that seems to occur is that when we have a lot of nouns in a system, so if I have a book that has lots and lots of things in it, it's easy to overuse them and to slip into that labeling kind of mode. And I do this myself, is when I open an app that I'm not familiar with and I start modeling, I find that my comfort zone is to go to where the pictures look like the things they represent and to use those to point out what we're looking at. And unfortunately, that's a perception of being helpful. What the child really needs is the language that goes along with those nouns. So try to keep a balance, and I try and use an 80-20 rule, so 80% core and 20% nouns being used in any particular activity in terms of modeling and availability. So helps to kind of keep that in check. And then the last kind of concern is around the core words that you see, the colored words that are not orange, can seem very abstract. So maybe I should start with something that is a little easier, a little bit more concrete. If you look at the core 120, and you look, and if you can see these words or you can see them in a system that you have, I think what you'll see is that every word that is here in color is a word that you are already using with your child verbally. So come here, we need to do this right now, clean it all up. You know, we're using a lot of abstract language already verbally, but when we see it visually, it becomes overwhelming to us, but it's really because we already have that verbal skill. If we didn't have that, then this wouldn't look any more challenging than our verbal presentation. So what I like to say is, if you say it, they should see it. And if you feel like the 120 words or the particular core words are too abstract, then I would say, see if you can remove them from your verbal vocabulary. And if you can't, then the child should have an opportunity to be able to use those expressively just like you do, because that's how prevalent and important they are. And recognize that your child is learning the meaning of those words through repetition of seeing you use it. They aren't meaningful to begin with. The representations aren't concrete, and they don't look like good pictures of what they represent. But over time, those associations are developed and strengthened. So we just looked at the Core 120, which is a board that I created, years ago and have used in lots of places with lots of different individuals successfully to provide verbal and visual language. This is the Core plus the Flip system by Deanna Wagner, and so this is the core part of the system, and then you can see up here is the flip board part, and that is available through the Angelman Facebook website. There's a link to the Google Drive where these documents are. This is a screenshot from the Avaz program. It's a 40 location display that is core based, because you can see the rainbow, and it does meet the criteria that we talked about today with the quantity and the language functions and the letters. Lots of folks are using the pod in paper-based or low-tech form or light-tech, and the Compass pod is also available for an app, and that would meet our criteria for a robust system. Here's the Touch Chat with Word Power with the page set of the Word Power 42 Basic, which is a nice system with a lot of good features. Here's an example of a custom page set in the Go Talk Now that is available for sharing in the Angelman Syndrome Foundation Communication Series Facebook page. And the Perlo Quota Go intermediate core page set, this is the 60 location version. We saw the 45 location earlier. So what are some of the next steps that you could take? You hopefully have been thinking about your child's or student's current communication system and evaluating whether that system meets the criteria that we're looking for, or whether you need to change up the page set within the app or program, or potentially look at a new page set. And if you like, whether you have a system or not, you can download the paper-based boards from the Facebook files and take a look at the vocabulary that's repeated across those boards. And then please plan to attend or view next week's webinar on aided language input. Thank you all so much for your time today.